بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله رب العالمين والصلاة والسلام على سيدنا محمد خاتم الرسل النبيين ومن اتبعه بإحسان يوم الدين. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the creator, the sustainer, and provider. We praise him and thank him for the countless blessings he's given us and the blessing of guidance. As you might know, in the hadith, the Prophet ﷺ, said that Islam started strange and will end strange. So, Tuba lil Ghuraba, good news to the strangers, meaning the Muslims or the people who follow Islam, who are different than the majority, the popular opinion, or the popular people around them. And as we know, when Islam started, there was a lot of resistance. A lot of people were critiquing and criticizing the Prophet ﷺ and making fun of him and humiliating him, mocking him and his people, and attacking them in many different ways, economically and verbally and physically and so forth. And today we see something similar. We see that Islam is calling for values and principles that are very orthogonal or very different from the mainstream world, right? If you look at the economy, the global economy is built on equity markets and bond markets. Bond markets, which is basically riba. You issue a bond, you give money to a group of people or a country or a company, and there's some interest associated with it. And the investor, right, the person who's giving out the money, collects that interest over a decade or two. And we've seen how the World Bank has led to not only the corruption of nations, but also their inability to continue to function. A number of countries have went completely bankrupt and caused chaos and uprising and poverty and so forth. When you look at the equity market, the stock market, there are some halal parts of it, but again, a lot of it is based on things that are foreign to Islam and foreign to human nature, like selling things you don't own, like trading on margins, for example, or trading things that are not halal to start with, and so on. So that's just one example. If we look around, we'll see many other things. And Muslims are not immune from falling into these confusing concepts. And as the Prophet ﷺ said in another hadith, that on the day of judgment, the Jews will be resurrected on 71 different groups or thoughts, and the Christians on 72 different groups or thoughts. There's 72 different flavors of Christianity. They believe in slightly different things. And you see some of them around us, Protestants and Catholics and Unitarians and et cetera, et cetera. And the Muslims will be resurrected on 73 different groups or thoughts, 73 different manhajs. And the Prophet said, all of those are in the hellfire, except for one group which follows me, which follows the Prophet ﷺ. So that is the group that upholds the Quran, that understands it properly, and understands the Sunnah, the lifestyle of the Prophet ﷺ, and implements it properly without compromising, without giving in. So it's so important. This is a prophecy given to us by the Prophet ﷺ, telling us about the future and giving us a heads up, a warning that, hey, don't fall into one of those 72 groups that are going to be in the hellfire. Be in that one group, which is the group of the Prophet ﷺ. So how do we do that? By knowing what would the Prophet do in certain situations. So as you move on in your life, as you work on your internship, as you do things at school, ask yourself the question, what would the Prophet ﷺ do in this situation, right? My neighbors or my friends at school, or people are celebrating, an occasion during the month of June, calling it whatever, Pride Month or whatever. What would the Prophet ﷺ do if he was living in our time? If he was living in this country, in this neighborhood? What would he do if he was living in a Muslim country and the same occasion is being celebrated globally, and maybe in some cases in some Muslim countries? So it's really important that we have critical thoughts about incidents, simple example I'll give you. Someone, a leader in the community in Florida, he shared on his Twitter how he was dismayed by a local Muslim chaplain at a university in the South putting on his Twitter feed Pride Mubarak. So he put a little picture that had, different colors, and it said on it, Pride Mubarak, wishing all LGBTQ Muslims blessed June, something like that. That's obviously what? That's exactly what the Prophet ﷺ told us in another hadith, where he says there will come a time when you follow the disbelievers step by step, foot by foot, up to the point if they were going into a crack in the earth of a lizard, you would follow them into that crack. And that's what, unfortunately, some of us are doing under the understanding or assumption of we're being diverse, we're being inclusive, we're a religion or a deen of diversity, inclusion, and so on, which is true. We are a deen of tolerance and inclusion and diversity, but where does the line get drawn, right? This is where that hadith about following disbelievers needs to come into our thought. So inclusion means if your next door neighbor is LGBT, for example, it doesn't mean that you go and slaughter them. It means that you give them da'wah, you give them the needs of a human being, food, drink, support, but you're not going to go and advocate for their lifestyle, right? If you have a thief living next door, someone that we know is a robber, we just can't prove it, but we know that this guy, every morning he gets up, he blocks the road and he robs people and then go back home. And we know that. We just can't prove it. We can't arrest him, right? But we'll give him da'wah. We'll try to help him get on the right path. And if he's resisting, then we'll try to set up a trap for him and arrest him and then uphold the justice upon him and give people back their rights. So similarly, this type of person, we would be nice to them. If they are getting abused, if they're getting bullied by others, we might, call for justice for them, but we're not going to go and advocate their cause. So it's really important to understand the Islamic perspective of things, inshallah. And you're all in a great position to do that through your internship work, whatever you're doing. You have the ability to make your voices heard, i.e. the voice of the Prophet ﷺ, the voice of the Quran and the Hadith in a pragmatic, practical way that is meaningful and relevant to today's society and people in their everyday life. So we'll pause here today, inshallah, with this little reminder. If anyone has